Curtis gets poorly, so he spends a lot of time in bed. And if he's in bed and he's poorly, he needs more physio. But when he's that unwell, he doesn't like the physio, because if you've got a chest infection and you're unwell, the last thing you want is somebody sort of beating your chest and your back. So by him being in bed and staying in bed and getting the rest he needs, we have a concern that then the chest infection will get worse. But then with the bed and the box that is the tilting mechanism, you press the button, it then tilts and rocks him every 30 minutes, hour and a half, 2 hours, and his chest infections go quicker. We've stuck to the half an hour because that was the one we started with and it works, so we don't want to jinx it by not using it. And I think also it's when we've spoken to his respiratory physiotherapist up in London and we said, look, we've got this tilting mechanism, and they were like, wow, what's it like, how does it work? Told them all about it. And they went, as much physio as possible. I said, well, we've got and I told them the timings. They went, if he's happy with every 30 minutes, then go with 30 minutes. And Curtis will sleep through most things, to be fair. But yeah, that works for him. We literally lie him flat in bed, and then put the tilting mechanism on, and then that way he sort of gets the half hour on one side, and then it settles back, and then it turns around and does half hour on the other side. If he's particularly unwell, then we can side lie him, and that's where you can then press all the different buttons on the bed to position him, to keep him in a position that you want him in. And even then we can put him on the tilting mechanism then, so we'll have a good half hour side lying, and then it may put him on his back for half an hour and then roll him back. But it has changed his life. It's changed our lives because we're not in hospital. He sleeps solidly. He doesn't wake up because of the tilting mechanism. I think if anything, it's quite soothing, and he goes to sleep because of it. It's sort of like being rocked to bed. But no, he goes to bed, and we don't really have any issues or problems with it. Because of the extent of Curtis's illness, he gets continued care. So he has 5 nights a week where we have healthcare assistants or nurses with Curtis. But it was a case of every sort of, by the time you'd manually reposition Curtis, and we were saying sort of every sort of 45 minutes you'd want to reposition him. By the time you'd repositioned him and moved him and got him comfortable, it was almost then time to turn him back round the other way. He wasn't getting as much turning because the time it took to manually turn him. Whereas the bed, it sort of does it with a push of a button. It literally gets him into that position really quickly. So it saves time for us. It means we're not disturbing Curtis by picking him up and moving him and rolling him, because that would wake him up. Whereas because of the smooth action of the bed, it doesn't wake him up. So he gets a good night's sleep. If he's unwell, he gets a good night's solid rest. The usual routine for Curtis is that he's well for the summer, and then come autumn, winter and spring, we're in and out of hospital constantly. It's a high cost for Curtis to be in hospital. I think the problem is that it's sort of the fragmentedness of the pots of money. So if Curtis had the tilting mechanism 2 years ago, we wouldn't have had the constant stays in hospital, because since we've had tilting mechanism on the bed, we've not been in hospital. So the cost implication is, if it's given early enough, then it prevents him to going into hospital. With the cost for us, it's the going there and the coming back, and sort of and the emotional cost, I suppose. And it's the quality of life for Curtis, because you know, we're being told, you know, Curtis is extremely poorly, he might not pull through, you know, it's seeing how we go in the next 24 hours, and luckily he's a tough little cookie. He pulls through. But it's the fact that since we've had the tilt mechanism, we've not had that emotional stress. His health and well-being has been tremendous, for the fact that we had to phone the hospital to go and meet the doctors and the nurses, because he's not been in hospital for the last 16 months. So we've just had our first autumn, winter and spring where we've not been in hospital, we've not had pneumonia, we've not had double pneumonia, we've not been in high dependency unit, and we've not been told that we had to say our goodbyes. And that's the first time. Curtis is now 6.5, that's the first time that's ever happened. The tilt and turn in bed is a life changer for Curtis. Yeah, absolute life changer. Because if he's unwell, he can still get physio. When he is well, he's still getting physio. When he's in bed, and he can't move himself. Curtis hasn't got the ability to move himself. We have to move Curtis for him. So it means that the fluids and any gunk that's in his airways or in his chest is constantly being moved and it isn't sitting there. Bacteria doesn't get to grow, infections don't get a chance to grow. And then when he then is awake and he has his normal physio, everything's moved. So it works in conjunction with all the stuff we're doing already, but it just means from the time he goes to bed to the time he goes and wakes up, that isn't lost time. It's almost like a therapy. Yeah. So he can have, it's a form of physio, but when he's asleep.
Hands-free.
Hands-free physio, it's brilliant. And he gets to sleep. Yeah. And it means as parents, we get to sleep because you're not worrying that he's going to get a chest infection. The worry's gone that he's going to be poorly. The worry is like, well, he's been in bed for, 6, 7, 8 hours sleep and we haven't done any physio. Right, we'll have to get up and we'll do the turning overnight. So it's all those things, they go completely. You put Curtis to bed, he gets comfy, you set him up for the night, you press the button, the bed goes into the mode that you want it to go into, Curtis sleeps through the whole thing, wakes up in the morning not knowing that he's had 10 hours sleep with 10 hours of physio, and he's probably wondering why he can breathe better and why he's quite happy in the morning. We have a suction machine for Curtis so we can move secretions and stuff from his mouth and airways. We use it, but we're not using it to the extent that we used to use it. Really? So we were having to manually remove secretions from Curtis because there was a build-up and he was coughing them up. And Curtis would have a build-up of secretions in his esophagus, in his windpipe, that were just basically lining that, and moving them was a nightmare. It took forever, but when he did move them, they completely blocked his airways, and it was like a big ball of phlegm. It was horrible, and we panicked as parents. He panicked because he couldn't breathe, and you're trying to get the suction machine working and everything else. We haven't had that since. When we were seeing doctors and going like, is there a medicine for this? Is there a form of physiotherapy we can use for this? Is there anything we can do to remove this? And we were told, no, it's constant physio. The more physio you do, the more it do. But there is only so much time in a day that you can fit in 3, 4, 5 30-minute physio sessions. With the bed tilt, I don't know what it does. But the moving, the rocking, the turning, it moves everything, and he just gets rid of it in another way. It doesn't sit there and it doesn't stick there, because when he was in bed, he was static. Whereas now, even if he's lying flat, there's that turning, so things are moving. Gravity gets hold of them and pulls them to one side. He goes the other side, gravity gets hold of it and pulls it the other side. So it's constantly on the move, which means that he can't sit there and become an infection. It's great.
Brilliant.
Seriously great. Every child like Curtis should have one of those. It's the cost implication. If you put pay out for it here, you don't have the £1,000 a day hospital bill at this end. We've sort of had reductions in sort of meds use and everything else because we were having meds to reduce the secretion build-up. So we're on less meds because we're not having to try and dry them out or remove them through medication. It's a case of we don't need those. He was on a combination of medications to try and get rid of all of these secretions that his body was making and producing. And it got to the point where it was drying him out too much because the combination of the bed and the physio that we were doing and just meant that he was having too much of this, and so then he was getting a dry mouth. Curtis never had a dry mouth. So it was like, well, now why is that happening? So we've had to reduce his meds because there isn't a build-up of all the secretions, and he's not coughing, so he's not constantly bringing phlegm up and secretions from his chest and his windpipe, and they used to well at the back of his throat, and they used to just sit there, and he'd constantly be coughing, trying to remove them, which is exhausting. And so we had to have medications to try and dry them up and to stop him producing so many secretions. Now we've had to lessen the amount of saline nebs that he was having, and we've had to reduce the amount of inhaler that he was having, and we've had to reduce the amount of tablets that he was having because it was a combination therapy for the secretions. But we've gone the other way now where we're too dry. So we've had to lessen them until we've got the right balance, that he's got enough so he's got a dry, sort of a moist mouth so we can, the same as you or I, but not to the extent of where he's overproducing them. And you do notice the difference. When we've been on holiday and we've not had the bed, you notice the difference. We have to up the meds. And we have to try and fit in more physio sessions. Because if we go on holiday, he doesn't have a tilt and turn in bed.